The miracle on the bus. Julián was an ordinary man. Every day at 6:30 a.m., he took the same bus that took him to his job as a mechanic at a small workshop. His life was simple, but there was something that kept it steady: his faith. Since the death of his wife 5 years ago, he had found comfort in the Bible. Each morning, before reaching work, he took advantage of the bus ride to read a chapter of the scriptures, meditate, and pray silently. It was his way of feeling that, even though the circumstances were tough, there was something greater than him, something that would never abandon him. That morning, like so many others, the bus was more crowded than usual. People were lethargic from the routine, some with furrowed brows, others absorbed in their phones. Julián sat next to an elderly woman who always took the same seat and began reading Psalm 46 in his Bible. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. He felt comforted, as he always did, reading those words. However, something felt different that morning. Halfway through the ride, he felt an intense gaze upon him. He looked up and met the eyes of a young man sitting directly across from him. The young man's eyes were deeply marked by distress, as if he were carrying a burden so heavy he could barely bear it. Julián felt a pressure on his chest, as if someone were calling him to act, and then the young man, nervously, broke the silence. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice trembling. "Do you believe in God?" Julián calmly closed his Bible, looked the young man in the eyes, and without hesitation, responded with a soft smile. "Yes, I believe in him with all my heart," he said, trying to convey peace. The young man sighed deeply, as if he had been waiting for that answer. Then he looked out the window, as if he couldn't find the right words. After a few seconds, he whispered, almost inaudibly, "I used to believe, but now I don't know what to think. I'm going through something very difficult. I lost my job, my wife left me, and yesterday I thought I couldn't go on. I thought about ending it all. But this morning, before leaving the house, I asked God if he really exists. Please give me a sign, if you're there." The young man went silent for a moment, staring blankly ahead. "And now, here you are reading the Bible right in front of me. I can't help but think that this is the sign I asked for." The young man's words left Julián in shock. He felt a chill run down his spine, and his heart beat faster. In that moment, he understood that God had placed him there, on that bus, for something greater. It was a reminder that sometimes, God's signs aren't great miracles, but everyday moments that invite us to act. "God has never left you," Julián told him firmly with deep conviction. Sometimes in life, we feel completely alone, like the trials have defeated us. But he is still working even when we can't see it. The young man looked at him as if trying to understand what Julián had just said. Then, Julián took a small piece of paper from his pocket and wrote down his phone number. "If you ever need to talk, don't hesitate to call me," Julián said, seeing the young man's tears begin to well up in his eyes. "And if you allow me, I want to pray for you right now." The young man nodded, his eyes full of tears, but also a glimmer of hope. Julián gently placed his hand on his shoulder, and in the midst of the bustling bus, prayed for him. He prayed that the young man would feel God's love and presence, and that he would find peace in the midst of his storm. When he finished praying, the young man took a deep breath, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his chest. He smiled shyly, for the first time in a long while. "Thank you," he said, his voice broken. "I think this is the sign I needed." The bus made a stop and the young man stood up. Before getting off, he turned to Julián and gave him a small smile, which, for a moment, lit up his tired, gray face. Julián watched him walk away, with the feeling that something had changed. At that moment, he realized that God had used him, not only to comfort the young man, but also to remind him that faith should never falter, and that sometimes the greatest miracles happen in the simplest of moments. That night, before going to sleep, Julián opened his Bible once more. He read devotionally, and when he reached Matthew 5 verse 16, he found comfort in the words, "Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." With a smile on his face, he prayed in gratitude, asking God to continue guiding him in his daily life, because he knew that sometimes miracles happen when we least expect them. The days passed, but Julián couldn't stop thinking about the young man, Mateo. He prayed for him every night, asking that he find strength and that the peace he had received that morning would endure in his life. A few days later, while Julián was in his workshop repairing an old motorcycle, his phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. When he opened it, he saw that it was the young man from the bus. "Hi, this is Mateo," he wrote. "I just wanted to thank you again for what you did for me. Your prayer gave me hope, and I decided to give faith another chance. I would like to talk more with you." Julián felt immense joy. God had heard his prayer, and Mateo was beginning to see the light. From that day on, they began to talk regularly. Julián guided him in his walk of faith, and little by little, Mateo began to rebuild his life. He found a new job, started attending church, and over time, began to heal. Months later, during a special service at church, Mateo took to the pulpit. With a shaky voice, he began to share his testimony. He spoke about how that encounter on the bus had given him a second chance. How, thanks to Julián's prayer, his life had completely turned around. With tears in his eyes, Mateo looked at Julián, who was seated among the attendees, and spoke a few words. Julián watched him from his seat, also with tears in his eyes. In his heart, he knew that he had not only helped Mateo, but had also been transformed by that moment. Because sometimes, miracles are not grand events, but simple acts of faith that touch us deeply. Because sometimes, a simple act of faith can change a life forever. And through Mateo, Julián also learned that faith not only transforms others, but also renews those who share it with love.